Bon dia, Eva Cordia. Hi, everybody. Eimear Burke here. Welcome to another Fireside Chat. And this is Fireside Chat 130, where I'm in conversation with a member of the Order of Bards, Ovates and Druids. So I will start, as I usually do, with a prayer for peace. Gomara Siacon, a fud na crinne. Gomara Siacon in our Jaili, agus in our Jira. Gonairi Lin, then our Kajgarmaka, Gangich Buikas Jev. Quiftica is spirit Quiftica. May peace prevail on earth. May peace prevail in our homes and in our countries. May our missions be accomplished. We thank you, guardian spirits and guardian deities, for peace. As the fever of day calms towards twilight, may all that is strained in us come to ease. We pray for all who suffered violence today. May an unexpected serenity surprise them. For those who risk their lives each day for peace, may their hearts glimpse providence at the heart of history, and that those who make riches from violence and war might hear in their dreams the cries of the lost, that we might see through our fear of each other a new vision to heal our fatal attraction to aggression, that those who enjoy the privilege of peace might not forget their tormented brothers and sisters, that the wolf might lie down with the lamb, that our swords be beaten into plowshares, and no hurt or harm be done anywhere along the Holy Mountain, with thanks to John O'Donoghue. So, lovely to see you all back again. And let me see where you're from. There's Ulster, Louisiana, Utah, Norfolk Island. Not a good connection, sorry, Linda. Aylesford, is it? New South Wales, Australia again, lovely Belgium. A rather dank and dreary Hertfordshire. It's actually, it's been mild today. It's 9 degrees in Ireland, not so bad in Kilkenny. Southern Oregon Mountains, Argentina, lovely. County Meath in Ireland, wonderful. New Hampshire in the USA, Slough. Liz says, such a beautiful frost here yesterday. I can't remember where Liz is from. Penzance, West Cornwall, South London, Wyoming, Castlegar, British Columbia. Wonderful to see you all this time. Sussex, wonderful. Snowy Finland, lovely. Well, this evening, actually it's evening time here, but it's morning time where we're going. We are going to the Okanagan Valley in British Columbia. Let me introduce my guest this evening, Graham Thomas. You're very, very welcome, Graham. You are muted, Graham.
There we go. How's that? Thank you, Eimear. Thanks for having me, and welcome to everyone who's tuned in already.
So, just now, I know that's not where you are, where you're not from at the moment, which is a funny way of saying it. But tell us where you are, and then it's where you're from.
Right. So right now I'm in central British Columbia, which is the westernmost province of Canada, in the interior, in a valley called the Okanagan Valley. But normally, what I'm doing, I'm house sitting here for a few months, spending the winter here. And normally I live in the province of Ontario in a magical place that's called the Bruce Peninsula, which I'll probably be talking a lot about today because it really informs a lot of my studies and the direction my life has taken me. So if anything, I'd call myself a landscape druid. So I'm just very connected to the land and its creatures, its trees and plants. And yeah, we can get into all of that.
Wonderful. So anyway, that's usually where we start with, is landscape. So tell us about the landscape that you are from, or the one that calls to you.
Yeah, because there's people from all over the world that watch these chats and tune in for the Tea with the Druid and things like that. I'll start from a place where I think a lot of people would know, Niagara Falls, the iconic Canadian Niagara Falls. So if you think of the water pouring over a big giant cliff face, that cliff face is called the Niagara Escarpment. except it doesn't just exist in Niagara Falls. It actually runs for hundreds of kilometers through the province in which I live, all the way up through southern Ontario. Then it goes under the Great Lakes and reemerges in Michigan, and actually goes all the way around to Wisconsin. So it's a massive fossilized coral reef system, and it's dotted with cliffs, and it's just an incredible landscape. Clear blue waters up where I live on Lake Huron. I live on this little narrow peninsula of land that juts out into the middle of Lake Huron. So if people have ever looked at a globe and seen the Great Lakes, Lake Huron is the middle Great Lake. So I'm kind of in the middle of the middle Great Lake. So
How do you spell it?
Lake Huron, Huron.
Huron. Okay.
Yeah, and it's some interesting facts about Lake Huron. It's actually hydrologically connected to Lake Michigan, which is another of the Great Lakes. And together, because they're at the same water level, it's actually considered to be one lake. And it's actually the largest lake by surface area in the world. If you just take Lake Huron by itself, it's about 60,000 square kilometers, a third or fourth largest lake in the world. So it's just a massive body of water. It's about 3 times the size of the country of Wales, just the Lake Huron itself. So it's like an ocean. So it's like living next to an ocean, except it's freshwater. And it was actually called the Freshwater Sea by the first Europeans who encountered it, because they'd never seen a body of fresh water that large before.
Wow. Blake, who is in the US, his grandparents-in-law lived in Cornwall, Ontario, but he's never been to where you are. He wants to know, how wide is the peninsula?
The peninsula varies. I think at its narrowest point, it's only about 5 kilometers wide, and then in other places 10 to 20 kilometers wide, but it's about 80 to 100 kilometers long. So it's long and narrow. And on one side is a body of water called Georgian Bay, which is a part of Lake Huron. And that water is cold and deep and Caribbean blue, crystal clear, with these steep Niagara Escarpment cliffs, which plunge straight into the water. And then on the opposite side, it's long, slow, sloping shoreline going into Lake Huron proper, with little sandy coves and beaches, and it's pretty magical place. And something that makes it special, the Niagara Escarpment, as I said, it runs for quite a distance through southern Ontario. There's actually a hiking trail, a footpath that was created in the 1960s, I believe, and it follows the entire route of the Canadian portion of the Niagara Escarpment. It's hundreds of kilometers in length, with all sorts of different side trails and incredible glaciological and geological features. And it's just right in my backyard. So there's hiking all the time. And a lot of times it takes you right up to these precipitous cliff drops, spectacular views, and lots of places for swimming too, when it's not frozen. So.
Oh, Blake suggests one could walk across the width. That would be a fun pilgrimage. So,
well, it's funny you should say that, because I actually know, I have 2 friends, and I think Georgian Bay is about 120 kilometers wide, maybe. So about 2015 or 2016, one or both of those years, Lake Huron almost froze completely over. So these 2 friends of mine, they took toboggans and winter camping gear, and they actually did a pilgrimage. They walked across the ice from one side of Georgian Bay to the other. It took them about 3 days. And as they were out there, the ice was shifting and moving, and it was, they made a little documentary about it, and it was featured in some magazines. So as far as I know, that was the first time people had actually walked across it. But they had survival suits and everything just in case. But it was a very cold winter that year, and the bay froze almost totally over.
Wow. The mind boggles when I think of waters freezing so they can be safe to walk across.
And even though I lived there, and I did do some walking on the ice that year too, not as far. I went out to some islands, and it even living there, it's amazing to think, wow, 6 months from now I'm going to be swimming in this water, and it's like you're standing on ice 2 feet thick. It's pretty crazy, the change that happens through the seasons. So again, the seasonal change of the place where I live is something that really informs my druidry, because I live in a place with 4 very distinct seasons, and just very crazy weather and climate, and from extreme heat in the summer to extreme cold in the winter, and then all the stuff in between. So
wow, lovely. Ferdiad, I grew up by the sea on the west coast of Scotland. When I lived on the shores of Lake Ontario, part of me just couldn't get my head around that much fresh water, especially as it wasn't tidal.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So did you mention the Bruce Trail?
I did, the Bruce Trail. Yes.
I missed that because Jamie Hume's greetings from Edmonton.
Oh, hi, Albertan there. Great.
Yes, and he says, love the Bruce. That's a very special place. Mohawk history. I saw an incredible sky event there with a friend from Northern Europe. And he said he's heard that the Bruce Trail is phenomenal, but has never done it.
Did he say a sky event?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I'm curious to know what that was, because that's actually something I was going to get to. But it, one of the things that I love about where I live, and sort of ties into my past as well, my love of astronomy, archaeoastronomy, that the Bruce Peninsula is a dark sky preserve. So it's one of these places where we have rules and guidelines so people don't pollute the night sky. So we try and maintain a very, very dark sky, so the way our ancestors would have seen it before the advent of artificial lighting. So I helped play a part in that over 20 years ago now, to try and make sure that the area, it was already renowned as a very ecologically significant area, but just to make sure that it was culturally significant in the sense that people could go to a place and see the stars the way our ancestors did. Because, as I'm sure everyone who's listening to this knows, the stars and celestial events play a huge part in how our ancestors viewed the world. I liken it to, it was the Netflix of its day. Like at nighttime, you'd go out and look at the sky and you'd tell stories about the sky. The mythologies that stem from observing the night sky are, well, they're worldwide, right? And then, well, in the last 120 years since artificial lighting, we're basically just erasing our past. And I just couldn't sort of see that happen. So I didn't want my son growing up in a place where he couldn't see what I had the privilege of seeing. So now it's an area where people come to do just that. So people come up, we have a local group, they do nighttime astronomy tours, sky tours, 5 nights a week. They have all local astronomers. They bring out their telescopes and they show people the rings of Saturn, or deep sky objects, nebulae, and distant galaxies. And for some people, it's the first time they've ever looked through a telescope, seeing the craters on the moon. And we've literally had people drop to their knees in like this religious experience moment. They've never known it. And even without telescopes, like we would have, when we first moved to that area, we would have people come visit us, and they drive up from the city, which is about 4 hours south of Toronto is about 4 hours south of where I live. A lot of people have heard of Toronto, which is obviously pretty light polluted, but they drive all the way up into the country, and they get out of their car and go to the back of the car, pull the suitcases out, and then they'd put the suitcases down and look up. And if it was a clear night, they would just like stand in awe. They'd never seen stars like that. So it's a pretty special place, both day and night. So, and that's something else that really informs the work I've been doing since joining OBOD, is incorporating the night as well as stuff that goes on in the day into a lot of my experiences and rituals. So the light and the dark, the light and shadow parts of both the exterior physical world and our inner worlds I think is so important.
Absolutely. My guest last week, Saga Bond from Sweden, we were talking about night skies. And
I heard her talking about the aurora. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So just beautiful. Yes. So Jamie says, I loved the prairie, and it took me a long time to get used to the extreme night sky presence and the incredible activity out there. It's such I suppose I'm used to a night sky, and I live in a rural area, and I was brought up in a rural area. Okay, I spent, part of my life in the city, but and then I lived in a desert. I lived in Turkana. It's a desert in the north of Kenya in the early 80s, and I became friendly with an American. She was a Peace Corps volunteer, and she was a stargazer, and she taught me how to read the sky. So we'd have a star map on the ground with a torch, and then you could have the whole sky because it was a desert. Just have the whole, and I was able to, in those days, I've forgotten now, how to read the zodiac,
Yes, yeah, and that is the neat thing. Once you become a regular observer of the night sky, you start to become familiar with the zodiac, and you recognize the different seasonal constellations. There'll be things you'll see in the summer, not the winter. So for us, Orion is a big winter constellation. So when I know Orion's back, it's like, okay, it's the seasons are shifting. And then, but unfortunately, a lot of people, especially who've grown up in urban areas, are just sort of missing out from that experience. I remember this is a story I heard when we were trying to get our dark sky preserve established. There'd been some story, and I think it was Los Angeles. I think they had a big power outage there one time, and the emergency lines were flooded because there were no lights in the city, and all of a sudden people were looking up and seeing all these strange things in the sky that they'd never seen before. So some people were thinking it was like an alien invasion or some kind of meteor swarm. They didn't know what was happening, and it's just unfortunate that that's all happened within the last 100 years or less in some places. The area I live on the Bruce Peninsula, they didn't get electricity till about the late 1950s. So it's pretty.
Sounds like Ireland. Yes.
Yeah, so.
Eric says, welcome to the Okanagan, and you will find it's much warmer here than in Ontario. Watch for the meteor shower your way if the clouds are clear tonight. And I have a feeling, and I forgot all about it. I think last night there was a meteor shower in Ireland. Am I right? Michelle, you might know.
I've been waiting to see it, but it's been cloudy here a lot since I've been here. So I've been here since early November, and I brought my skis, hoping I'd be skiing by now, but it's been, I guess there's a big El Nino in Western North America, so it's been, I guess, unseasonably mild in a lot of places. So yeah, I threatened you before I'd take that sweater off as we got going. So yeah.
I commented, viewers, that my impression of North Americans is they heat their houses when it's freezing outside and they wear t-shirts inside. Mm-hmm. Gross overgeneralization, I'll have you know. Yeah. Where here I'm wrapped up, so I run a coat.
You've got a lot more hair than I do too. So
it actually, I have to say, it does keep me warm. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes. Anyway, so what? It's the Geminid meteor shower tonight. Thank you, Freddie. So it's tonight. Okay. Well, after this, I'm going to have a look out. So Jamie Hume says, the sky event was during the day. It was beyond imagining shapes in the clouds. We saw a Viking Norse ship. It was incredible. Distinction, movement. There was more, but know that the Norse came down the St. Lawrence and likely explore the Great Lakes as well. The Mohawk know this. I was told that's where their blue-eyed members got their blue eyes. These ancestral moments speak through time. I'm sure they were connecting to let us know. Say hello. What an incredible greeting. Humbling. Okay.
That's a very timely comment, because I was literally just reading about that last week. And it's in some circles it's quite contentious how early was the contact between the European continent and the New World, and there's been a lot of new research showing that what we thought was the story is not exactly the story. So yeah, there was probably a lot earlier contact than we think. There's some anecdotal stories of some type of early iron and copper mining done by Europeans in the Great Lakes area way sooner than I thought. And of course, it's well known that the Vikings did come to Canada well before Columbus. So
yeah, because I got my DNA done years ago. It wasn't to find out what my ancestors. I'm interested in seeing, because there was a documentary a number of years ago. This was before people getting their DNA became a popular thing, and that all these companies. And I went back through the mitochondrial DNA, and you've got 7 haplotypes on the mother line. You know, Brian Sykes was an English guy, wrote a book, The 7 Daughters of Eve. So Eve came from Africa, and she had 7 daughters, and then they migrated, and we are all descendants from one of those 7 daughters, and they call them haplotypes. And the common haplotype for Ireland is H. We pronounce it with a H, the letter H, okay? But mine is X. And at the time, they said it was the first X they had found in the Irish sample. And they said that 10% of the Orcadians in the Orkney Islands were haplo-X, 30% of the Ojibwe, Eastern Canada, haplo-X, and then a cohort among the Druze in Lebanon. And that's what's really interesting. You're thinking, well, how did that happen? Well, there were raids from the Leinster tribes here. They went up to Orkney. The Vikings came to Orkney. They went over to Canada. So either, I don't know who was bringing haplo-X, either bringing it from Canada here or bring it from, I've no idea. That connection, and that's going way, 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 way back, long before Columbus. Yeah.
Yeah. So and along those lines too, I just heard a study fairly recently. They've been doing DNA sampling of some of the native indigenous tribes deep in the jungle in South America, and they're discovering traces of DNA from Polynesia, which they never expected, because apparently the traditional story is that all of the people in North and South America came over the land bridge during the last ice age and moved from north to south. But that idea is quickly losing traction, because for that to have happened, the traditional timeline of that was about 13,000 years ago. And just recently they've discovered human footprints in the southern states that have been like pretty firmly dated to at least 30,000 years ago. So
Wow.
the amount of time that people have been in the Americas is much older than we were traditionally told. And where those people came from is, there could have been multiple waves of population from different places and different inbreeding. So yeah, it's really interesting, and I like it because it's one of the things that I've often struggled with doing Druidry, but in the New World, because I live in a community with a fair number of Native people, and they are trying, after centuries of subjugation and colonialization and residential schools, they are slowly sort of reinterpreting, regaining their culture. And we're going through a big truth and reconciliation movement here in Canada right now. So I'm always, so a lot of this could be used to divide people, but I'm trying to figure out how can we use this to bring people together. And because we have an extant nature-based spirituality right in our midst, like we can see what they're doing there. And there's so many similarities when I read about the history of Druidry in Europe, and I'm looking at what's being practiced in my own backyard. I'm like, well, this is not native or European. This is human. This is how humans used to interact with their landscape. And we were all conquered once by someone. So
Right.
The Romans invaded Britain, as everyone knows, and I might use that as a jumping off point to talk about my back to my landscape again, if that's okay.
Sure.
Yeah. So I talked about the Niagara Escarpment being this ancient fossilized coral reef system. So it's been dated to between 400 and 450 million years ago. And geologically speaking, that's being named the Silurian period. The period before that was the Ordovician period. And then you can go through all you might have heard like Jurassic and Triassic from the dinosaurs. Anyway, the Silurian and Ordovician go back close to 500 million years, 400 to 500 million years ago. How did they get the name Silurian and Ordovician? So at the dawn of what we call modern scientific geology, this was as creationism was being sort of disproven scientifically. Maybe I shouldn't say that, but or challenged scientifically. The early geologists were realizing the Earth is way older than the stories they were initially told. The evidence is showing it to be otherwise. So one of the early geologists, I believe his name was Murchison, in the 1830s, he was doing geological studies in South and Central Wales. And he noticed that you could identify a certain geological period by looking at the different types of life and fossils that existed within it. So he named the fossils that he was finding in South Wales the Silurian, after the tribe that used to live there, the Siluries. And the tribe just to the north of them, the Ordovices, had different fossils that were older, called it the Ordovician. So reading through the Druid stuff, like, okay, Druidry sort of got this tie into Wales, and these landscapes, these limestone landscapes full of fossils. I found that really interesting. But again, we're going back a long, long time. But the interesting thing is the Niagara Escarpment, the landscape that I live on, is also a Silurian landscape. So if we go back to that time 400 plus million years ago, it was one big landmass that sort of split apart, and one half migrated through tectonic plate action to where Europe is now, and one part went over to North America. So in a way, I'm still living on the same land as where my ancestors come from. So it just shows that we're all really connected to the land, and we all are from this one planet. So the divisions that are so often present in politics or culture are just that, they're artificial. And if we can find our commonalities, realize we come from the same earth, the same minerals, the same water, we're just one. And that's what I love about Druidry. It's such an inclusive path. It's not very strict. It's bringing people in rather than separating people.
I think that's so right. And I think with advancements in technology and our abilities to, date places and bones and DNA and all of that, because this program that I had watched that prompted me to go get my own DNA tested, he had gone collecting spit from everybody in Ireland. And then he went to the Basque country. And in Galway, on the west coast, there are sallow-skinned, brown-eyed people. And why? People used to say I was a redhead, typical Irish with the freckly skin and red hair. Yet that's never mentioned. Mostly the Celts or the stories were described as skin as white as snow, hair as dark as the raven, and lips as red as roses, and they were the descriptions of people within the myths.
Right.
But anyway, people said, oh, it's because of the Spanish Armada that a few sailors landed, and I think one might have survived and land in Ireland and wouldn't have been that prolific to account for all those dark-eyed, dark-skinned or darker-skinned people in Galway. So when the presenter went to the Basque country, and he said, "Oh, they're very like people. You could have put those in Galway." That he took their DNA as well, and it was the same DNA, very similar, but it's Neolithic. That it's not that we don't have genetic markers for the Celts. I don't know where they went. They just left their language and culture and everything else behind. But you go back, we're all mongrels, and I think that's just fascinating. It's a great leveler. The Celts came to Ireland 700 BC. We thought maybe the first humans came 7,000 years ago, and now we've recently found no, it was 10,000, because they came across the bones of a bear that the bear had been killed with an axe, and the bear was dated to 10,000 years. And we had, I think, the first people to populate Ireland were black, blue-eyed people. So, more and more gets revealed, and as soon as we get into purity and racial, all of that kind of nonsense, and who belongs here and who's the real person, we're getting into trouble when in fact we all came from Africa. Well, others may say that is one, I suppose, robust theory. And I've been in that cradle of mankind. The Tanzanians will say, no, Olduvai Gorge is where the first one. And then the Ethiopians will say, no, theirs is. So, but, there's more uniting us than dividing us, if only
exactly.
we could. Right.
And that's what I've been struggling with, because politically in the country I'm living in now, there's sort of this divide opening up between the original inhabitants versus all the newcomers, the settlers, the colonists. And I've had people call me a colonist before. It's like, it's a little jarring. I had no say in coming here. My parents came to Canada after the Second World War. My mom was from Liverpool. She's Irish by ancestry, and my dad was Welsh by ancestry. But they left England in the early 50s. The country was not in good shape at the time. Post-war rationing was still going on, so they had an opportunity in their late teens to move to a new country. So I don't think they came with the intention of being colonizers. They were just, like a lot of migrants today, just looking for a better start. So, yeah.
Most people, that is, yes, there have been, empire builders. Most people went to get a better life, and this is why people migrated out of Africa in the first place. Yeah. You move because climate change or something has caused you. Like if our ancestors were either hunter-gatherers, and those who they followed the animals. So it's all of that we learn, that we move with good intent. However, if there are people already there when we come to a new land, and then there's all of that, that becomes the difficulty. Yeah. Owen says, Owen is a traveller, and he's a member of the order. He's an Irish traveller, far more in unity than in division. While there are gaps, some of the Indigenous tales echo of how people came to the island, Ireland, which warms me in terms of nomadism. Even St. Patrick, one of the figures that in the common thread represents Ireland, was an immigrant. Complicated. I agree, Owen. We belong where we are. I think so. And it's about making peace with that and making peace with our land. It's a hard one. Because
It is. I know, and I
I
don't think we've got it figured out yet, but I think people of goodwill and good intent, I think we can make this work as long as we don't get sidetracked by being sucked into different divisions, be it on social media or whatever is going on today. But yeah, I think most people are generally good and want to see things move in a good direction. And again, that's what I like about the order. And again, I'm just going to go back to where I live, being inhabited by, they were called the Anishinaabe people, the first peoples of the area in which I live. They were basically an oral tradition society. So a lot of their oral traditions had survived. And what's been amazing, that as what we call modern Western science has sort of progressed, what it's actually doing is it's reinforcing those oral tradition stories that at first were kind of poo-pooed, or they thought, oh, that's a quaint story, that's really neat, but it wasn't probably real. And now they're realizing, well, actually, no, that was true. So one of the examples is there's an island in Lake Huron. It's the largest freshwater island in the world. It's called Manitoulin Island. And the oral tradition was in our area that people used to walk from the peninsula over to Manitoulin Island. You can't do that today. It's a 2-hour ferry ride. It's completely submerged underwater. And they thought, well, this must have been, they must have made this up, or they must have thought about a different island. They had it wrong. But again, as more research has been done, they realized that after the last ice age, the levels in the Great Lakes fluctuated wildly up and down. And at one point, indeed, there was a land bridge between the tip of the peninsula and Manitoulin Island, and they found submerged trees still rooted to the rocks deep underwater. And another fascinating thing they found, and I think you can see this online, it's on a YouTube show called Drain the Great Lakes. They took submersibles under the Great Lakes to look for all the mysteries that were sort of hiding under there. And about a kilometer offshore of one of the most visited tourist attractions in our area, unbeknownst to anyone, was this massive, what would have the time been the largest waterfall in North America, but now it's completely submerged underwater. So going back thousands of years, it would have been this massive waterfall with plunge pools. So, and now it's just buried. So it's not a waterfall anymore, but they could see where the course of the river went and where it went over the.
But because the level of the water went up.
Now it's underwater. So again, these things are just waiting to be discovered, hidden secrets, and a lot of them are I don't want to say buried, but carried through in oral stories, and a lot of them are now being shown to be true. So
I'm just thinking this might be quite controversial. I don't know. You know, if the level of the lake began to drop, people would be really, really concerned, and maybe blaming climate change or human interference destroying a beautiful lake. And yet, that could, supposing it did happen, then all of this beauty would have been revealed. You know, a waterfall and these pools, and that, well, you know, that the world evolves and changes, and our landscape changes with climate change, regardless of cause. And that it's really interesting to think, you know, those submerged trees still clinging to rocks.
They've been dated to about, I think, over 7,000 years old. They're still the trees are still, these are ancient, like white cedar trees clinging to rocks, and they still look like stumps. It's amazing. They've lived on, like, not lived, but haven't been destroyed or degraded by the water.
It's like, how does that happen? That roots can still cling underwater. That's fascinating. So, you know, having that lake come and flood that area might have been a tragedy at the time. And now it's a beautiful water expanse, blah, blah, blah. Just fascinating. And then you have this
and this is like at the very beginning when I said I consider myself like a landscape druid. I love looking at the land and trying to figure out what it's trying to tell us, because it tells a story. If you look deep enough, be it looking for fossils or for ancient water levels, how lake levels changed or ocean levels changed. It's just fascinating. So the area I live was part of the Great North American Glaciation event. So we were covered by 2 to 3 kilometers of ice as recently as like about 12,000 years ago, 10 to 12,000 years ago. And in the aftermath of the end of the ice sheet, all of that water, or a huge proportion of it, with the exception of a few remaining glaciers today, melted relatively quickly, geologically speaking, and eventually made its way into the oceans. So at the height of the Ice Age versus the end of the Ice Age, the global ocean levels had risen 400 feet. So, and that's pretty fast. So if you could imagine the world today, if our oceans rose 400 feet, we'd call that like, that'd be an unbelievable catastrophe. But this is what was going on, and people were alive when this was happening. These great changes were taking place on the landscape, huge flood events, especially at the end of the last Ice Age. So the area where I live is marked with lots of evidence of catastrophic flooding. The escarpment cliff face near where I live is dotted with sea caves, which were caused by massive like wave events that would mine away at the cliff face. There's glacial potholes, which were caused by vortices of water under intense pressure, moving at incredibly high speed, drilling down into the limestone, creating these perfectly circular holes. When they were first discovered by the early settlers, the pioneers, they called them the devil's potholes because they couldn't figure out how these things were made. Lots of weird geological formations were attributed to the devil. There's a big monument, a stone monument where we lived called the Devil's Monument, and it's a flower pot. So it's a rock formation that's narrow at the bottom and really wide at the top. They can go tens of meters in height, and they were created by wind and wave action, carving away at the cliffs, leaving these sea stacks. And they're right along the shore of the Great Lakes. So they're quite popular tourist attractions now. There's tour boats you can take out to see them. So, but again, attributed to the devil until our science caught up with trying to figure out how this happened. So yeah, it's a pretty magical landscape. And
I'm fascinated. I'm just thinking of our own history here, or our own mythology. You know, when the Celts came, the Milesians, and the Tuatha Dé Danann were the people who occupied the land, and then there was an agreement that the Tuatha Dé Danann go under the earth, and that the Celts would stay, or the Milesians would stay above. And I'm just thinking of that underwater world there. I'm just thinking mythologically that.
So, well, it's funny you say that, because that's another thing that resonates very deeply with me, is this idea of the underworld, because not only do we have the Niagara Escarpment, but it's also classified as what's called a karst landscape, which means it's completely riddled with underground caverns and caves and passageways, many of which have probably never even been found, or some haven't even been discovered. There was some work done on it maybe 10 or 20 years ago, where scuba divers would just walk out into a field and see a hole and it'd be full of water, and they'd put gear on and just work their way down into these tight, pitch black, convoluted crevices, like the braver stuff than me anyway. So, and they were discovering some of these things went thousands of feet, like all in different directions. And they got to the point where they could either the passages were narrow, they couldn't make it through anymore, or they'd reached the limit of how far they could go with their tanks. But there's still lots more to be discovered. This flooding that takes place. There's a place I know of where you can go through just a hole in the rock, and there's like an underwater waterfall. It's like, sorry, underground waterfall. It's a little stream gushing over rocks, and it sort of disappears into the rocks again. It's only to reemerge somewhere along the cliff face. It's pretty cool.
Wow. Yes. What is it? Sean says, my 6-year-old son Thomas is listening to while we're sorting seeds and wants to know if you think it's Atlantis.
Oh, how long do we have? So I don't know. I'm really into the Atlantis myth because of the idea. Like I think the story of Atlantis comes to us, I think it was Plato maybe who first wrote about it, and he dated he got the story. He got the story in Egypt from some Egyptian priests, and he asked, when did Atlantis get submerged? And they told him 9,000 years ago. And at the time that he wrote that story down, that was like over 2,000 years ago, I think, or something. The time he wrote that down, it would put it to about the end of the last ice age, when this catastrophic meltwater came off of the North American ice sheets and filled the oceans up 400 feet deeper. So throughout human history, a lot of settlement and what we call civilization has been done in river deltas or along coastlines. So if there were any larger civilizations or human habitation along coastlines at the end of the last ice age that are now about 400 feet under the ocean. And again, there's a lot of the ocean we haven't even explored yet. So there could be an Atlantean link there, but I don't want to go too far into that.
It's fascinating. Just earlier, Carmen, who's in Spain, she asserted that haplo X, and I was talking about that, my haplotype, are from Atlantis. Anyway, I mean, I've heard that before, and it's a fun idea.
Yeah.
But then there's an Ojibwe creation myth that there was a big flood. And the mother had her babies, and she had to move west to find land to lay them, and obviously in eastern Canada, and there was a tsunami when part of Norway fell into the sea.
Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah. One of the creation myths in our area, and I hope I don't get this wrong. If I butcher it, I apologize. But it involves, again, a great flood and either a turtle or a beaver having to go down and retrieve mud from the bottom to sort of recreate land. So if the beaver put the mud on the turtle's back, so I think they call the traditional name for the land base where I live, they call it Turtle Island.
Yeah.
So it's, again, what would at first be sort of thought as a sort of a quaint mythology may have some real truth to it. So a way to interpret, because again, at the time, how would people understood what was happening to them with the landscape? Because we're worried about, with modern global warming, the ocean levels going up. I think they've gone up 8 inches in the last 100 years, but imagine a 400-foot rise within a few thousand years. That would make a huge difference to any culture that was trying to survive in that time. So
absolutely. Yeah. Just fascinating. So you're getting lots of reaction here. Carmen says Plato inherited the story of Atlantis from his grandfather Solon, who visited priests at SAIS in Egypt and told them about the story. Graham Hancock talks about that. I don't know if you've followed him.
I first heard of one of the stories I was going to tell. One of the first trips I took to the UK as an adult was in 1994, and my wife and I we spent 4 months in England, and we just wanted to travel around. We avoided all the big cities. We just wanted to sort of see the landscape. I wanted to go to a bunch of old stone circles. This is before I was aware of Druidry, but I was like sort of drawn to the idea of large scale stone buildings on landscapes. Stonehenge, of course, but we went to lots of other ones. Went to some old Roman roads, and we were staying at a hostel somewhere, and I was looking for something to read, and I picked up this book. It was one of Graham Hancock's first books, and that sent me down that rabbit hole for the last almost 30 years now. So but that also informs a lot of my Druidic studies, because it ties together a lot of things that I'm interested in, the idea of studying the night sky. My background in school was architecture, so I studied architecture. So I was always interested in aligning buildings oriented to certain directions. When I was growing up, the big thing was energy efficient building. And we were being taught that if you could take any building and save about 20% of its energy consumption just by orienting it properly on the landscape. But I grew up in suburban Toronto, and they just take houses and just plop them all over the place willy-nilly, and it made no sense. And when I was in architecture school, I was like, we've got to have a better way. We have to respect the landscape that we're living on and build accordingly, instead of just plopping these boxes everywhere. I grew up on the outskirts of Toronto on Lake Ontario, in a little town called Ajax, which is they named it after one of the British battleships from the Second World War, and all the street names in the town were named after crew members on the battleship, or I don't know if it was a battleship, some kind of naval ship. Anyway, that's its claim to fame. But it was just a small town way out to east of Toronto. But as I was growing up as a child, it was all the places that I would love to go and play, like little wetlands or swamps or streams, rivers, fields. Everything was just getting gobbled up. So I'd go to another place, and then that would be bulldozed and make way for a subdivision. So it just turned into big box stores and roads, and even at a very young age, I felt it like something's not right here. It was hurting me, and like I didn't want to be part of that. And so as I went through architecture school, I thought, do I want to be part of this system? How can I still do this but not contribute to something that's causing me like spiritual pain? So I was very fortunate that I was able to spend a few years working up in northern Canada, and like really north, so up in the Arctic, up in the Yukon Territory, the Northwest Territories, and I got to work at a firm that was doing a lot of work with First Nations people at the time, helping to build cultural centers or museums. At the time, they were getting land claim settlements from having their land taken, so they would direct a lot of those funds into building learning institutes for their kids, or places for their elders to sort of spend their final years. But it was all sort of culturally infused with a lot of their traditions. So it was really neat to be part of that. But just by matter of circumstance, I was doing a lot of computer drafting. I was like clicking my finger, and I ended up with like really bad carpal tunnel in one of my arms. So I thought, oh, this is not good. After a couple of years of doing that, so what I ended up doing, I learned to use a mouse with my other hand. I was okay.
Well done.
Problem solved. Anyway, a few more years of that, I was like, this isn't working. Now that arm's cramping up. I thought, if I keep doing this, I'm not going to be in good shape in short order. And this was in my 20s. I thought, still have some years left. I got to do something different. So my wife and I were living up there at the time, and we thought, it was pretty remote. We were far from friends and family, and we had a good few years up there and had a lot of amazing experiences. But we kind of wanted to be back closer to friends and family, but we didn't want to be in the thick of what's called the Greater Toronto Area, the big subdivision around Toronto. So we thought, well, let's move to the Bruce Peninsula. And we literally knew nothing about it. We just hiked there a couple of times, but we liked it. We liked hiking there on the Bruce Trail. So we said, what if we moved there, bought a piece of land, and just tried to make a go of it? So we started in our late 20s, early 30s. We bought a 25-acre farm that was first settled in 1888 by some people from Scotland. Didn't even speak English. They're Scots Gaelic speaking pioneers who came over. Our areas got a lot of Scottish people, Irish, German, in the original European pioneers anyway. And so we bought this farm. It had been abandoned, needed a lot of work, but we thought, okay, let's just see if we can make a go of living here and creating a life and supporting ourselves from the land through whatever we could do. So our motto was like anything for $1. So it was like we were making things and selling things at farmers markets. We opened up a couple of the rooms in the old farmhouse for bed and breakfast. This is way before Airbnb. And yeah, we farmed. We did community supported agriculture, organic farming. So we had a loyal customer base where we provided weekly vegetable baskets for them. We learned a lot about gardening, and we started baking. The farm property we inherited had a huge rhubarb patch on it.
Go away.
What are we going to do with all this rhubarb? So coincidentally, at the same time, a new restaurant had opened in the town just south of us, and they were looking for desserts. So we baked them a couple of desserts, and those turned into more and more. And then the restaurant started sending people right to our farm to get the desserts. And then within a couple of years, we'd opened up an organic bakery. And then that's what I did up until about 2018. So we ran and operated an organic bakery on the Bruce Peninsula, which is quite a popular tourist destination now because of all the outdoor activities that can take place there. It's a scuba diving capital because of the really clear waters of Georgian Bay and Lake Huron. It's great for scuba diving, and there just happens to be a lot of shipwrecks there. A lot of shipping was taking place in the 1800s, early 1900s, and before modern navigation, a lot of the ships were foundering or getting sunk or hitting rocks and reefs. And so there's tons of diving opportunities there. The Bruce Trail, of course. It's also an incredibly biodiverse place. It's a UNESCO World Biosphere Preserve. It's got incredible flora and fauna. It's got rare snakes, rattlesnakes. We've got carnivorous plants. We've got rare ferns. I think we've got over 40 species of wild orchids. I think we have the second highest concentration of wild orchids outside of the Florida Everglades. Of course, we've got the Dark Sky Preserve. We've got a migratory bird flyway with an international birding area, bird banding station. So it's great for bird watching. So it was traditionally a place where people would just come for nature-based getaways, excursions, hiking, swimming, boating. And then I'd say since the dawn of social media, because of the landscape is so iconic, it's just kind of exploded in popularity, and it's getting swarmed with tourism now. So it's caused a lot of change in the community within the last 10 years or less, I'd say. So
And
it's been discovered, so to speak.
Is it a cause for concern, that popularity?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, it's causing a lot of friction, a lot of there's been a lot of trouble with trying to find accommodations for all the seasonal workers, because a lot of hotels and restaurants and their workers, there's no place for them to stay because everyone's renting out any space they can, garages, trailers, caravans, spare cottages for Airbnb. So there's increased traffic. We've had to institute paid parking, which if you'd have told me 20 years ago that would happen, I never would have believed it. We have like traffic issues. But again, so for a short part of the season, for like the sort of, I'd say mid-spring to mid-autumn, and then it gets really quiet. And we have, I think, the population on the part of the northern peninsula where I live, I think the population is 3,900 people. And in the summer, we get well over 700, 800,000 people. So that's a lot of people to service from a very small population. So, and a lot of the things that people come to see are getting trampled. People are digging up the orchids.
Okay.
So they have that stuff going on too. So it's sad, but again, hopefully we'll figure out a way. I think it comes from a point of people craving that connection to nature, but maybe not having been taught or not figuring out how to interact with it in a sustainable way.
It's not about taking nature home with you.
Right. Yeah.
And I think, yeah. Wow. So, I mean, that sounds idyllic apart from the crowds. And so what have you been doing?
Well, I'm not working for the tourism bureau, but I mean, it's also it's remote, and the weather can be quite harsh, and the winters can be brutal, unforgiving. We get a lot of power outages, road closures due to like intense snowfall, because we live, like I said, on this little narrow strip of land out in the middle of the Great Lakes. We get a weather phenomenon called snow squalls. So a lot of your listeners or viewers may be familiar with that, but it's when autumn winds whip across the warmer Great Lake water. The lakes warm up in the summer, so the water is warm, but the land and the air gets cold, and it sucks all the moisture out of the Great Lakes and dumps huge amounts of snow. And so they call it the snow belt area. So we can get huge dumps of snow sometimes, but I would say the last 10 years, it's been very unpredictable. Some years we get warm winters with very little snow. Other years it can be freezing cold with lots of snow. So it's been hard to predict.
Wow. Yeah. So what have you done since 2018, since you stopped your bakery?
Yeah. So 2018, 2019, I think it's 2018. So my wife and I had been running the bakery since about 1996. And we were thinking, okay, maybe it's time for a change. Do we want to keep doing this? Are we going to be doing this for another 10 years? So my wife said, I want to take a break. She ended up going to work for our local national park. We actually have two national parks in our area. We have one on the land, and we actually have an underwater national park. It's called a marine park. It's one of the, and that's where a lot of the shipwrecks are, and a lot of the underwater features are contained within this underwater park. She went to work for them. Her background was in biology and nature interpretation, so that was a good fit for her. And I joined a local NGO. It's called the Bruce Peninsula Biosphere Association, because it's a UNESCO World Biosphere. We have a group there that helps preserve and protect certain parts of the land and the ecology. They're instrumental in helping protect the night sky. They do a lot of the work with the night sky interpretation with the local astronomers. So I signed on with them to become an outdoor adventure guide. So I started leading ecological tours showing people the incredible sites and flora and fauna of the area. So to try and teach people how to interact with this very, very sensitive and fragile land base, and how to do it in a way that's conscientious and sustainable. So I would take relatively small groups, 10 to 12 people out on four-season events, and those included things like hikes, obviously nature hikes. We would do winter snowshoeing. We'd take people out into the national park snowshoeing, and some years there wouldn't be much snow, but we'd get a lot of ice spray from the Great Lakes, Georgian Bay, the lake, and it would freeze everything into this crazy icy winter wonderland. So we'd put crampons on and take people along the shorelines walking. Winter. We did owl prowls, nighttime owl prowls, listening for owls. That was pretty cool. Caving, we did a lot because there's a lot of caves in our area. We take people with headlamps on and go deep underground. Again, that sort of connection to the idea of an underworld. I love that. So I try and infuse a lot of mythology into the interpretation too. So it wouldn't just be about the date of this or the age of that, or this is this species, but trying to weave together a story about these things and why they matter and how they interact with each other on the landscape. One of the things I would always point out to people was the story of our ancient white cedar trees. So this relates to the Niagara Escarpment cliff faces. So I believe it was in the 1990s, some researchers from the University of Guelph, which is in Southern Ontario, they started looking at cliff faces worldwide as unique ecosystems. They thought, what's going on cliff faces? Mm-hmm. They're not on the ground. They're not up in the air. They're not in the water. It's a vertical landscape.
The heavens and the earth. Yes.
Yeah. So it's like this sort of in between world. So they started with the assistance of a lot of rock climbers. They would go rappel down these cliff faces, and they were looking for different species of snails that lived on there. And all along these cliff faces were these twisted, stunted, gnarled cedar trees. Some of them would be quite small, like a few feet long, and they were not really paid attention to until someone started. They thought, I wonder how old some of these trees are, and they thought they might be 60 to 100 years old. So they started taking core samples, and what they inadvertently discovered, and they weren't even looking for this, what they discovered was the oldest old growth forest in eastern North America. They were dating these trees into the hundreds, some into the thousands, some close to 2,000 years old. And they found some that had died and fallen off the cliff, and they lived, I heard one was almost 2,500 years old, these ancient cedars, and they were never paid any attention to, just because they had no commercial value, because they couldn't be used for timber, because they're all twisted and stunted. They were out of the reach of most people because they were up on these 200-foot tall cliffs, until modern climbing equipment. No one would even have paid much attention to them. But there, sitting in plain view, was for all this time, was this ancient forest. So
it's fascinating, the ability of trees to grow on a cliff face. Rowan trees do the same. There's a sacred site in Sligo called Carrickeel, and there are lots of passage tombs there. But there's one mini cliff, and there is an old oak rowan tree, and I don't know how old it is, but it's just coming out of a cleft in a rock, and the trunk is quite thick, but it's a tiny little tree, and I'm just always fascinated at a tree's ability to do that. And I've seen it. I was in last year in Bavaria. I was at an OBOD gathering, and before we went there, our hosts Bettina and Egbert took us to this place called Druidenhain, which means Druid Grove.
Okay.
And you have these massive big boulders.
Where was that again?
In Bavaria.
Bavaria, okay.
Yeah. So these massive big boulders with these trees, and they're just rooted through the rock.
Yeah, it's crazy. You look at it, like, how can they survive up there? So, especially in our climate, because in the summer they're just baking on these cliff faces. It can be 40 degrees Celsius on these cliff faces. No moisture, rain, like no rain for weeks at a time sometimes. Then in the winter they're getting pummeled and encrusted in ice and minus 30 temperatures. It's you think, how is this surviving? But they're tough. So They are what I would call like an ancestor tree, a very sacred tree, both to me and to the first peoples of the area too. It was one of their 4 sacred plants or trees, the cedar, the eastern white cedar. So I actually have a piece of one, and I got a piece of a stump, and I've sanded it and polished it, and it's maybe about, I don't know, that big around. And the rings are so close together, you almost need a microscope to count them. It's hundreds and hundreds of years old. It's just just amazing. And again, I wanted to bring this back to how I feel like this affects my druidry since I've joined the order, is the idea of revealing that which is hidden, like the stuff that's either on the landscape that's could be in plain view, but until you actually start looking for it, you don't see it. But also the inner landscape, the stuff that's hidden within each of us, the sort of psychological secrets, the traumas, the past wounds that we all carry around, our scars. So I noticed scars on the landscape, but the scars within people that we carry. How do we go forward in a way? What can we learn from the landscape, the resilience of the landscape that we can take with us on our own journeys? I hope that's not getting too metaphysical there, but
No. I'm just fascinated with this, and I know from the reaction that people are just fascinated too. You said you were earlier, well, not an interview, but 2 days ago. You're a storyteller, and you tell stories of the landscape. Do you have a story you'd like to share with us?
I have a couple. So when I started working for this environmental NGO, it was about the same time as I started working working on my Bardic grade with OBOD. Okay. So I first got involved with OBOD by listening to the Druid casts and my walks and hikes, and then I thought, this has been me all my life. I just didn't realize it. So, like, I think a lot of people I hear in this group, it's like almost like coming home, like discovering, oh yeah, this is what I've been doing all my life. I just didn't know it. So, so before I got the Bardic Guerci, I was developing a hike for my NGO, and I called it the 4 elements. And I was trying to speak about how the 4 different elements interacted to create the landscape. So I talked about the water, the post-glacial meltwater, the Great Lakes, the land. I talked about the rocks, the ancient Silurian landforms, the fossil reef, and then I brought in the element of fire, because when our area was first settled, it was covered with a huge pine and hemlock forest, and it was basically clear cut within a few decades. So this really pristine forest was chopped down, and a lot of the logs were used for construction, timber, Royal Navy masts, anything you can think of. So this once pristine landscape was just scarred, devastated, devoid of any trees. And what had happened is they left so much logging debris and slash that it eventually dried and baked in the sun and caused huge forest fires in our area. And these forest fires scarred the landscape from the Huron coast to the Georgian Bay coast, from the tip of the peninsula all the way down. It was just a devastating, catastrophic fire. And to this day, you can walk through the forest and find the charred stumps from that fire from over 100 years ago. So I would take people through this. The forest has since grown back. It's a lot smaller, but dotted throughout it are these often huge stumps that are way bigger than the trees that are around them, and they're all charred black. So when I first moved there, I thought someone had been having like campfires out in the woods and a tree stump, and it was only more recently that I learned, this was a landscape that was devastated by fire. So I infused the talk with fire, and then for air, of course, I talked about the night sky and the importance of the migratory bird flyway. So one of the stories I was going to tell today was a story about the passenger pigeon. Have you heard of the passenger pigeon?
Go on. No, tell me.
Okay, so it's an incredible story, but it's also it's very sad and depressing.
We could do with that at this time of year.
Okay. So the passenger pigeon was an incredible bird that lived in North America, and it was the most abundant bird, I think, on the planet, possibly ever. At the time, we're talking into the mid 1800s, the population was estimated to be about between 3.5 to 5 billion birds. It was, and they estimated that 40% of the avian biomass of North America consisted of passenger pigeons. And they would sort of move up and down the eastern seaboard of the US and into southern Canada, following the nuts and the mast of the trees that would be ripening. And they were colony breeders, so they all hung out together. They'd move in these massive flocks. So when I say massive, it's an understatement. So they would darken the sky. They would eclipse the sun. These flocks would be so thick it would turn day to night. There's one tale from the 1860s of a column or a flyway of these passenger pigeons being about 2 kilometers wide and 500 kilometers long, and it took 14 hours for it to pass overhead. One flock of these passenger pigeons. And again, they'd move north as the season created fruits and nuts, and they'd move back south, migrate south, and they would roost in such huge numbers that they'd land on trees, and the trees would collapse. All the limbs would fall off from the weight of all the birds on them. And they were incredible flyers. They would fly 100 kilometers an hour, 60 miles an hour, sometimes as low as a meter off the ground. So they used to call it the river in the sky. There's a river of life, of birds just flying. And within 40 years, they were all gone. It's just an incredible story of a habitat destruction, overhunting, and like just mismanagement. And we're now without that. So it just makes me really sad that a lot of people don't even know about this bird, don't even know it existed. And it used to be the most dominant creature in our landscape, or at least feathered creature anyway. And apparently it used to deafen. It'd be like people would liken it to the sound of an approaching locomotive. It's a roar of wings, billions of wings beating, flying at 60 miles an hour. Like, how do you even imagine that, right? So
it's fascinating. How did they get their name? Passenger pigeons.
So I think it is a type of pigeon. I'm not actually sure. I've got passenger. I'm sure I could look that up. But from a bird that numbered in the billions, I think I've been told there's 7 stuffed passenger pigeons left in the world, in museums and places.
You mean they were decimated completely?
They were decimated. Yeah, they went extinct in, I think, 1914, maybe. Yeah. So I think the last one spotted in the wild was in 1898. And in the 1860s, they were still numbering in the billions. So within less than 40 years. And it was primarily from habitat destruction, land clearing, and hunting. And because these birds numbered in such huge numbers, people thought you could hunt. So it was hunted for sport and for some food, but it's hunted for sport. And people would go out and they would hunt. And apparently the only reason they would stop is their finger would get sore from pulling the trigger all day. It was just, they'd have mountains of these birds on the landscape just for fun. And I think the term in trap shooting, you have the term the clay pigeon. I think it came from the passenger pigeon. They would just hunt them because they were fast flying, low flying.
Okay. Yeah. That makes lots of sense.
And they're sadly gone. So what can we do now to make sure equivalent things don't happen under our watch? So that's kind of how I got involved in the dark sky movement, because I thought 100 years from now, people could say, oh yeah, people used to be able to go outside and see the stars, but we can't do that anymore. So we need to be much more conscientious about our landscape, as I'm sure everyone listening knows. And there's probably similar tales to all sorts of different landscapes, the way humans have overhunted, overfished. And it's, I don't know if enough of us are learning, but
time.
But telling the story, I think helps. Telling people what.
There was one question from a viewer. Are you reforesting that area where the fires were?
Yes. Yeah. So there's, through a combination of planting, taking over fallowed fields and replanting them, and then through an incredible amount of conservation effort, because of its biodiversity, it tends to attract a lot of environmentally conscious organizations. As I said, we've got a couple of national parks. We've got a whole bunch of other different NGOs that are involved in land acquisition. And what they do is they just put the land into preserve status where they don't allow any building on it. There's replanting efforts. But I don't think the forest will ever go back to the way it was, because now it's a different, the makeup of the trees is different. There's been more invasive species. So, but that being said, it is still, even after those fires, it has regrown to such an extent that it now comprises the largest intact contiguous forest in southern Ontario. So it does show the resilience of the landscape if we can just keep our hands off stuff for long enough, right? So,
just when I asked you what's the origin of passenger pigeon, Cliff says from Wikipedia, its common name is derived from the French word passager, meaning passing by, due to the migratory habits of the species.
Right. Oh, that would make sense then.
Yeah.
So, and another interesting story is that I talked about the shipwrecks in our area, and I don't know if you've seen North American lighthouses. They're like these white towers. Maybe they're white in a lot of places, but ours were white because they used to paint them with passenger pigeon dung. The piles of dung from passenger pigeons was so plentiful that they would just sort of mix it with the water and brush it onto the lighthouses as a cheap form of primitive paint. So
yeah, I think lighthouses, the ones here, are always painted white.
Maybe for visibility, but yeah, I guess they had a plentiful source of white pigment from the passenger pigeon dung. So yeah, so that was the type of stories I would tell as we moved through the landscape on these hikes or different adventures. And then something happened, some little thing happened in the world. I don't know if you remember it in 2020, little pandemic, and that really put a damper on people traveling and tourism, and our NGO was struggling to get enough people to go out on these hikes. So it was struggling. We were making a bare go of it, but it was in the province where I was living, where this was taking place, Ontario. We'd have a lockdown, and then it would be opened up, and then it'd be another lockdown. I think we had like 4 waves of different lockdowns, and each time I kept getting more and more frustrated, and I reached a point where I said, I don't know if I can keep doing this. I want to do something different. My wife, who'd been at the national park, she was also thinking, maybe I'd like to do something different too. So we'd both spent about 4 years, after having run our own business and bakery for close to 20, we'd spent about 4 years working for other people.
Yeah.
And working for other people can be good, but it's got its headaches as well. So we thought, well, we've got this 25-acre farm. We've got the infrastructure we developed over the years from doing the bakery. We had the gardens and the land. We thought, what could we do to have one last kick at the can with this piece of land? So that's kind of where I can talk about now. We opened up a new business, and we called it Ravenstar. So our bakery used to be called Harvest Moon, and the new business is called Ravenstar. And Harvest Moon was about sort of growing, harvesting. We liked the cycles of the moon. That's kind of how we came up with that idea. But what we wanted to do, again, by now I was neck deep in OBOD stuff, and I was really embracing it. And I wanted to create a place for people to come to have those magical experiences on the landscape, where they could hear both scientific and the mythological stories woven together. A place where people could gather and have unplugged experiences, getting away from technology. So we opened up a series of nature trails. You asked me earlier in our pre-interview about what type of art or music or storytelling I was into. So I would say primarily my big focus is sculpture, land-based sculpture, large sculptural pieces on my land. We built a big labyrinth out in our field so people can wander. And we put this map together where people would wander through our property through lots of different types of habitat. And along the way, there'd be little story panels behind fairy doors on all the different trees of the area, like a magical arboretum. We had a herbal medicine garden, We put up an outbuilding, a geodesic dome, which we use for events, both daytime and nighttime events. And again, we're not trying to do all this ourselves. We're sort of laying the groundwork, and we're just inviting friends and neighbors and other facilitators in to use the space to share their knowledge. Again, it's a place for sharing. So we have people coming in doing body-based therapies, yoga or meditation classes, local herbalists coming doing workshops. We've got a friend who works at the national park. He's an ecologist, and he's really into nighttime insects. So he did these workshops where he set up all these different lights of different frequencies that would bring in all the night flying pollinators and insects. And he'd set them up with these illuminated screens and bring in all these moths and nighttime beetles. And people would love it, because again, it's like this world that you don't know exists. So I'd see these gigantic beetles on these panels at night, and I'm like 3 inch or 4 inches long. I'm like, oh my God, those are flying around at night. I'm going to make sure I keep my mouth closed if I go for a night hike. But and we have a lot of friends who are musicians, so we've created some outdoor stages where people can play music. And we've also infused it with food, because we grow quite a large organic garden. So we offer outdoor picnic adventures where people come, they get a picnic basket, they can wander the trail. We've got picnic tables set up in the forest. So we call it the Forest Bistro. We have a seasonal menu, and it's kind of all infused with magic. Everyone's off their phones. We don't let people take their phones on the trail. And we thought, some people might like this. They might spend 45 minutes wandering around and having a picnic and leaving. And people are out there for hours at a time. We had someone out there for 6 hours, just like taking in everything you could see, just meditating on the outdoor platform. So we've been doing this now this is our second year. We just finished our second season. It's slow. It's difficult to explain to people what we're trying to do, but we're still at it. So, and again, that's where I'm finding I'm infusing a lot of my my druidry. So I'm able to. I built an outdoor sacred grove, which is sort of adjacent to the trail, and I sort of have a little panel explaining what it is, so people can go in there. Often I'll have a little fire smoldering away in there, so people can go in there and meditate. And got little rock gateways at the 4 directions.
Lovely.
And then people can wander through gardens, the herb garden. So I'm just starting my into my ovate studies now. So we're getting into the plants and medicinal uses of plants. So I'm being able to incorporate a lot of that knowledge into the herb gardens. And it's a pretty magical piece of property on a magical piece of land base. So that's feel very, very fortunate, very blessed. I mean, again, I don't want to oversell it. It's not been all smooth sailing. There's been, like everyone's life, there's hardships and traumas, and I don't want to depress people with all of that stuff. But
wow, it's fascinating. And Liz says, and Liz is in the US, and Liz, I'm sorry, I can't remember, you mentioned earlier where you're from. I'm so inspired, Graham. I'm just starting to develop my own homestead and hope to create a lot of the same things. And Gabriella says, did you find it scary to start this project? And do you have any tips?
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah. And it's terribly scary. It's still scary now. We're 2 years into it, and we're like, what the heck are we doing? I'm like, and I was telling you in the pre-interview, one thing I struggle with living in this modern, fast-paced, technologically based culture is I feel like such an outlier sometimes. I think, is there something wrong with me? I'm like, I work really hard in the spring, summer, and fall. I take my winters off. I go inward and hibernate and try and do a lot of the inner work. And a lot of people I know that I respect, I look at them and think, maybe should I have been doing that? Should I have gone down a different path? So I'm always second guessing myself. I'm sure a lot of us are, but it's almost like it's a calling. It's almost like I couldn't not do it. So we're going to keep doing this for a while, and we'll see where it goes. So
Liz is Wyoming. Thanks, Liz. Philippa says it's very brave of you to do this, but sometimes it's easier to do it than not do it. And we mentioned in our pre-talk the fact that you've retired to BC for the winter, or this is your time to draw in. But you're one of the few people who can do that in winter. We're all living in such a modern world that we're busy, yeah. And that you can
Yeah.
shut everything down and then just go and be. Now, that's wonderful.
Yeah, and to be honest, it's only very recently I've been able to do something like this because our son just left for university during the pandemic. So it's only been recently where we haven't had him at home with us. So he's away at school now. And we're looking around going, okay, we've got this time in the winter. So my wife got offered this house sitting gig in the Okanagan Valley here. And after she'd booked her tickets, I thought, well, I could maybe use that time. And I thought, I'm just going to devote it to working through my O8 grade because I found it very difficult when I'm at home to make time for it because I'm like, there's always something to be done outside, especially gardening, farming, and starting a new business. So all the usual distractions are gone. So I brought 2 suitcases with me, one like clothes and one it's all like journals and O8 books and my Druid stuff. So I'm trying to spend at least a couple of hours every day on catching up. So I got the O8 Guers. I've already received them all, but I've only worked through about a third of them. So it's brilliant. But I've understood from listening to a lot of people that when you first join OBIT, you think, oh, I have 3 grades. I can do that in 3 years and I'll be all done. For anyone who's just starting it, yeah, it's a longer journey, but it's a very fulfilling journey.
Jamie Hume says, sounds to me like you're on the right path to you. A life well lived.
It's been pretty good. Yeah. I mean, looking back when I knew I'd be doing this with you, I started jotting down some ideas, going back sort of chronologically through my life, and that's not too bad. It's not a bad life. It's again, I could do an equally long list of all the troubles and hardships, but no one wants to hear that. So focus on the fun stuff. Yeah. So Ravenstar has been our new project, and you'd mentioned people like hearing some poetry. So I did have a couple of poems. They are not my poems, but a neighbor of mine is a poet and an artist. And so as part of this magical nature trail with sculptures on it was being developed, I asked her if it would be possible to share a couple of her poems, and we printed them on little panels out on the trail, and they are near different sculptures that relate to different things on the landscape. So one is about a nest. So there's a giant sculpture of a nest, a big, huge bird's nest. So it's an interactive sculpture where the idea is people are encouraged to take bits of grass or twigs or strips of ribbon, and as they interact with the giant, I don't know, about 6 feet in diameter, maybe 4 feet tall, a big bowl made out of cedar branches, curved cedar branches. It's all woven. So the structure is there, but people are asked to add their own little strip of whatever they can find along the trail and help keep the sculpture being built. So there's a poetry panel next to that. And then I talked about the Silurian landscape, the fossils, so we have a display of a whole bunch of different Silurian fossils, and she had a poem about fossils. So I thought it was a perfect tie-in. So I could read those 2 poems if you'd be interested.
Absolutely. Just to get back to talking about taking time through the Gwers, Ferdiad says, there's a small and devoted club of us in Obod who go around whispering, no, take longer on each grade.
Yes.
And Liz says, and she's so right, life happens and makes the journey through the grades a bit longer. There is 7 years to get through the Bardic grade, and it was important not to rush it. So
and again, it's one of those things. It's even if you do finish it, you're still going to be doing it. So there's no point in rushing it because it's going to be with you for the rest of your life. So
I think that just saying that is that it doesn't stop. So why rush getting to the end when you're going to be doing that anyway? And interesting. So a number of my guests, when they've said, they might have done each grade 3 times, or like Dave the Bard, our Pendragon, talks about, as soon as he finished the Druid grade, he went back and got reinitiated as a Bard and did it again, realized I'm a Bard. And that's what's really, really important. And Blake, I think you're so right. Everybody does things at their own rate, and different people need different amounts on each grade.
And I think it's important not to put that pressure on yourself, thinking you have to keep up with someone else's progress. Someone else might have gone through one grade really quickly and another one very slowly, and you might be having the opposite experience. Or again, everyone's life has different ups and downs and things that almost make it impossible to do certain things at certain times. But it's kind of always with me there. So it's I always have it waiting. So.
Yeah, well, Tiny says, finally, someone tells about the fact that an active life doesn't actually leave us enough time to be involved in studying the teachings of Druidry at Obot. That's one of the, I think, that can be the same with any course of study. I find like there isn't enough time, and that's just, I suppose, life. And Joseph says, talking about the path is not the same as walking it. Sounds like Mr. Graham is a walker. Isn't that lovely?
I do like walking, both metaphorically and physically. That's one thing I've been doing a lot since we came out to the Okanagan. It's a very different landscape where we live. It's cliffs and rugged, rocky landscape, but it's generally flat. But here I'm in the mountains, and it's taken me weeks to get used to walking up and down all these hills. I'm like, oh, geez, I'm definitely getting my exercise, my steps in. So.
A different kind of fitness. Blake says, one wise elder in my grove, as to course progress, always says, you have to want it enough to actually progress and do the work. True. You also need to want it enough not to rush it.
Yeah, it's finding that balance, right? So, yeah, that's
anyway,
so true. Yeah.
Over to the poetry.
Yeah, I'm just gonna switch my screen here, so I'm gonna lose sight of you, but I think you can still see me, right?
Yes.
Okay, great. So the first one I'll read was about the rock of our landscape and the fossils. And again, this is by a local poet whose name is Kim McKellar. Okay. What was this living thing that left behind proof of its existence, carved in a rock? A link from this day to the last day it creeped, crawled, or slithered, brought to life now and then when a curious child finds it and calls it treasure. What will I leave when I go? Words and bones and DNA, or maybe something less tangible, laughter in the wind, hope layered into bedrock, secrets swirling in the lake I love. No one will know it's me, but I will have left my mark, not in stone, but in spirit.
Lovely. It's beautiful. Thank you.
And the other one is about the nest. I know what it is to build a nest, to weave together strands of love and hope and pray the branch will hold, that it will be a place for new beginnings, for shelter, but then one day see, eyes wide, heart racing, how exposed it is, and the short distance between safety and hard ground, and to worry, will it last? Will they survive? Can I give them all they need before they fly away from me?
Beautiful. There's lovely comments. I'm going to read them out. Beautiful. Lovely poem. Thank you. Thank you, friends around the world. Peace. So vivid and read with such tenderness. Lovely. Thank you. Beautiful.
Right. So I had another little story about
Go on.
About a nest. So this was when I was working through my Bardic grade and building my outdoor grove and setting up my different gateways. Anyway, had it set up for, I think I started in the spring and had it set up for the summer. And then I remember going out there in the autumn, and the leaves were starting falling off the trees. And I was looking up through my little eastern gateway, and there, just like a few feet outside of the gateway, just hanging in a tree, was a little bird's nest. Oh. And it was there all summer long, and I never saw it until the leaves from the trees disappeared. And I thought, oh, that's so fitting. The birds, the air, the eastern gateway. And again, that idea of revealing that which was always there, but it's just kind of hidden or obscured from view. And until you're ready to see it, sometimes it won't appear.
That is so beautiful. And it's like the mysteries being revealed at the right time. And it's I mean, you will have experienced this, and I imagine many of our viewers and people who've talked about this, that the magic of standing at a particular gateway and then something from that element reveals itself,
Mhm.
like buzzards flying over just as you open the Eastern Gateway. Or I remember we were holding a ceremony for someone's father who had passed. The funeral was in another country with our friend, but we were holding a ritual here in support. And one of us was singing a song about "And may your spirit soar." And with that, this spark jumped out of a very small fire up into the air. At the time he was being buried. It was just, we discovered that afterwards.
Yeah.
And it's those, at the right time, the landscape speaks to us in a really magical and beautiful way.
Mhm. Yeah, and being willing to listen to it in a non-skeptical or judgmental way. That's especially growing up in sort of the sort of Western scientific mindset. It's like, oh, it's just coincidence, or oh, it doesn't mean anything. But if you're really open to it, the messages are there all the time. I remember, again, this is during my Bardic grade, I'd invited a bunch of people over for a spring equinox ceremony. We were in the Grove. So in my part of the world, we associate the return of robins with the beginning of spring. So it was March 21st or something, March 22nd, whatever the day was that year. Hadn't seen a robin up until that point. Anyway, we were out in the Grove at dusk. I think it was just still a bit of daylight. We had still some snow on the ground. We're holding our ceremony, and then I hear a noise, and I look up, and literally right above our grove in a tree that's overhanging, it was the first two robins of spring on the first day of spring, on the day we were holding our ceremony. I thought, okay, if this is not a sign that I'm on the right path, I don't know what is. So now I'm just sort of looking for that all the time now, and it's amazing. If you look, what you'll find, that connection between us and nature is a lot closer. So there's a funny, weird story. Living in the country, we don't have access to a lot of services. So for many years, we would be cutting our own hair. We just get like home barber kits and chop our own hair off. My wife, especially, she'd like grow her hair long and get frustrated and like, I'm sick of long hair, and she'd shave it all off or cut it really short. And she'd always like take her hair and just sort of throw it out in the field or under some trees or something. And then we noticed one year a bird's nest fell from a tree, and it was made out of branches and twigs, but it was all woven with her hair. I was like, wow, that's crazy. So now we do that. If we have leftover hair, we put it outside. And just before I came out here to British Columbia, I was leaving Ontario, getting things put away, and I found two more nests with our hair kind of woven into them. It's pretty weird or not weird, but magical when you realize there's animals out in nature using parts of you to build their nests. So
it's beautiful.
Connection is so close, yeah.
That's just lovely. So, do you have another poem? Or
let me see here. I might have one more. Yeah. Again, this is also by Kim McKellar. And this ties into what we were talking about earlier about the trees clinging to rocks. So a lot of the trees in our area are they don't have a lot of soil to live in, so they make their lives in these cracks in the rocks, including we have a lot of maple trees, sugar maples. So we are able to make our own maple syrup. But this tree, I think, is related to some maple trees. I see you, the tall and the small, sentinels with deep roots, and youngsters, feet just barely set, the talkers whispering in the canopy, and quiet, scraggly bits of brush. I see you, silver and scarred, bark peeling like apples meant for pie, one that stands alone on the rocks, resisting, and the lovers, trunks and roots entwined. I see you dipped in midday gold and brushed with stars and shadow, you that bend your leaves to follow the sun and wake from winter sleep, sap rising, making spring sweet upon my tongue. Heart open, I trail my fingers through the leaves and over the contours of your skin. I see you.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful.
So, and that's relating to the another big marker of spring in our area is the is maple syrup season. So a lot of our friends and neighbors, a lot of people make their own homemade syrup. So everyone's out in their bush late February, early March, tapping trees and collecting the sap. And so we've made it a custom ever since we've lived there. We not only boil the sap down to make syrup, but we also, for the 6 to 8 weeks that maple syrup is on, we use the pure sap to make all our teas and beverages out of, and coffee. So if you've never had coffee made out of maple sap, it's like just a hint of perfect sweetness and infused with maple flavor. It's just absolutely.
So you're putting the coffee into the
Yeah,
hot.
we eat the raw sap up, boil it or whatever, and coffee or tea. Another one of our favorites is we take black currant leaves and maple sap is just amazing. So.
Yeah, I love blackcurrant leaves. They're lovely.
Yeah.
Lisa says that poetry saves my soul. Thank you.
I'm really glad to share it. So I reached out to Kim a couple of days ago when I knew I'd be doing this. And
now, Blake, I don't know if Kim would give this permission. What did he say? Would love it shared in print. It's so beautiful. I mean, he may not want that.
Yeah, no, and she has. I think she's got 3 different poetry books. She might be able to find them online, and I can also possibly email you the ones I read, and you could share them through.
What's her name? Kim? I just put it in.
Kim McKellar.
Kim. And do you have a title of her book?
Unfortunately, because I'm away from home, I don't have the books with me. I just have some copies of the poems. So it's Kim McKellar, McKellar.
Yeah, A-R, not E-R. Okay.
A-R, yeah, and MC, not MAC.
Yeah, I have that. Okay. Well, anyway, so people can look her up there. Brilliant. So, given we're going to round up soon. So one concern that you have about the modern world, given what you do and how you live.
Sorry, one concern about the modern world?
One loud one, because because you have to come up with a solution, and I'm joking. So,
well, I think I touched on it earlier, but this the division that I see now that is unlike anything I think I've seen in my lifetime. Like either I was very naive or not paying attention, or the division didn't seem to be as pronounced as it does now. Be it political division, cultural division, racial division, you name it, and the very idea that there's trench warfare going on in Europe right now just blows my mind. So I thought some of these things that are going on now, I thought were things from our past that we'd learned from, and literally what's going on in the Middle East has been happening my entire lifetime, and it's a mixture of frustration and exasperation. So one thing, when I first moved to the peninsula, I was very involved in, broadly term it, activism, environmental activism. As chair of our local environmental group, as I said, I was involved in the Dark Sky initiatives. And because we were organic farming at the time, I was heavily involved in politics of food. So when all the GMO stuff was happening, and I got into activism protests. And it's funny, this was over 20 years ago now. We're woof hosts. I don't know if you've heard of woofing before.
Howard and I were woof hosts.
You were? Okay. So yeah, so we've been woof hosts since the mid-90s, and we've had hundreds of people from around the world coming to volunteer at our farm. And one of our very first woofers was from the UK, the name of Richard, and he was in a band called Seize the Day. And
yeah, I've heard them.
Enough, like I heard them on one of Dave's Druidcasts one day. I'm like, oh my God, this guy's been at my farm, and now I'm hearing it on Druidcast. So again, it's one of these signs that, okay, maybe this is the right path. So he, at the time, he was traveling North America with his band, and they were heavily involved in activism. They were at the big Seattle World Trade Organization protests. So I heard his tales, and I thought, that sounds like that's where I could devote some energy. So I got involved in a lot of these big anti-globalization protests. And probably for a good 15 years I was doing that, and I just looked around and I thought, is this helping? Is this message getting through?
Mm-hmm.
Are people getting it? This culture is so powerful, so dominant, so consumptive. I don't know what it's going to take to break through. And I reached a point where I felt like I was really hitting my head against a wall and suffering for it. It's like spiritually and psychologically trying to, for lack of a better term, kind of wake people up. But
Yeah.
a relative of mine said at the time, he said, and what are you going to do with all these people once you wake them up? And I was like, oh, that's a good point. So I think I've realized, I don't know if comes with age, but I realized I can make the biggest difference by, as what someone had mentioned earlier, walking the walk, just sort of following a path, trying to set an example, trying not to be too preachy or didactic, and just letting people know that, or giving people small glimpses that there's different ways to interact with the culture and the landscape. And it's difficult though. Like it's the red pill versus the blue pill sort of. In some ways it could be easy to just sort of succumb and say, okay, I surrender and just be part of the dominant culture. But I think anyone who's probably listening to this already realizes that's not for them. So that's probably why we're all here, looking for comradeship and some solace in what can often feel like a lonely journey. I don't even know if I've answered your question or not. So,
but I think many people can resonate with what you're saying. Where's the hope in all of this? It's a challenge. Well, I could say the sort of conventional trite answer, with the young, with the next generation. And I only say that just because my son's 22, and I sort of see him and I see his friends and I see how they interact with each other and what they're aware of and how much more open they are and observant at their age now than I was at that age. So it's that double-edged sword of what we were talking about earlier. The technology can be both a blessing and a curse. So it enables us to have a lot more information, a lot more connection, but we have to use it in a responsible way. So, and funnily enough, growing up in the middle of the boonies and trying to live a very land-based existence, like when we were raising our son, we didn't even have TV for the first 7 years of his life. Yeah.
Now he's fully involved in the computer world. He's taken computer engineering, so he's gone to the dark side in a way. But I think he's going there because he realizes there's hope if there's people with moral standing in that industry to try and that's what he wanted to do. He went into it because he wanted to make sure that AI didn't sort of take over without some type of moral compass behind it. So.
Let's hope he succeeds.
I hope so. He may be outnumbered, but he's got a good mixture of both the sort of modern scientific techno world, but also his upbringing. I hope we left enough of an impression on him that he's got that side of his personality too.
I think I don't know, I could be wrong on this, but I was the same with my kids. We didn't have a PlayStation and none of that stuff. And, until, my brother gave a Nintendo to my son when he was 10. That was the first time technology came in. Okay, There was TV, but all of that was limited. But not having had their brain exposed to that, has given them, I think, credit. Like we've all had that.
Yeah.
A technology-free part of our life. I don't know what it's like now for babies being born.
I have a good friend who's got a child 10 years younger, and it's like a night and day difference. Like they were just with the technology was ubiquitous by then. So I don't know if it's just the timing of when all this sort of started. My son really didn't grow up with social media, and but it's getting harder and harder to get away from that. And that's actually a challenge we found going back to our new Ravenstar business. Is like, how do we do this in a way that is authentic for us, but also like, how do we promote this? How do we get people? It's like this black hole that sucks you. Like you have to, in some ways, like you have to have some type of online presence.
Yes, you do. It's
then
about
you just spend all day in front of your computer just doing social media posts, trying to get clicks and likes and bookings, and I'm finding that one of the most challenging things. So
I'm with you on that one. I understand it. You know, the question someone says, well, what are you going to do with all those people that you wake up? And I was thinking, I had an answer, and then Jamie beat me to it. If they're awake, they should be starting to think for themselves.
Right. Yeah.
So,
And I don't want to say that I'm always thinking for myself and I'm this perfect individualist, but because I'm far from that. But it can be lonely when you take a position that's counter to the dominant narrative, and I think we've all seen that, especially through the pandemic or through the political division. So everyone's aware of the political division that really exploded in the States, and then that sort of crept into our country too. And just the interactions with people seem more strained now than I remember them being. And I don't know. I'm hoping the pendulum is going to shift back and we can find some more common ground again. But I don't know what that's going to take.
who knows?
Take more OBOD.
Aren't we all so perfect? That's
why we're here. Yes,
full of 30,000 perfect people.
Mm-hmm.
No, but it's. I suppose it allows us. The teachings allows to question and to waken up to ourselves and to the landscape around us. And long may that continue. We have come to the end of our time, and we could continue talking for much, much longer.
Yeah, this has gone by so quickly. So, as everyone on Joe Rogan says, I can't believe this has gone by so quickly. But yeah, because when you first said, I thought, I don't know if I'm going to have enough to talk about. But,
everybody thinks that too.
Yeah.
So my usual questions, what's your favorite season, and what is your favorite ceremony, on the Wheel of the Year?
I've heard you ask that before, and I was lying in bed awake last night trying to think. It's like I only have one child, but people say it's like trying to pick your favorite child. But I think because for such a long time, the nature of my business, it was very intense during like sort of late spring through summer into the autumn, and the winter was sort of more downtime. Even as a child, I always loved winter, and again, that's enough to get you slapped in Canada sometimes. So people don't want to hear that, but it's if you prepare for it, if you wear the right clothes and have the right attitude, it's can be a pretty magical season. For me, it's like the world just goes quiet. All the hustle and bustle quiets down, and it's I'd look outside the window and everything's covered in feet of snow, and I'm like, oh, I don't have to do any weeding or lawn mowing or pruning. It's just like I can just rest of it. All I have to do is clear some snow. I like winter, but I think as I get older, I am realizing the darkness of the winter is if it's gloomy, gray and dark. I don't mind if it's sunny, like the bright sunny days, but we've been last winter in the Great Lakes area. I think they said we had the darkest, least sunny winter we'd had in like 90 years or something.
Oh.
And I think we saw the sun like 4 or 5 days and like 2 months. That was tough. So yeah, winter, autumn and winter, I'd say would be my two favorite seasons. My favorite ceremonies, probably the autumn equinox. I love that one because even before joining OBOD and becoming aware of a lot of the associations with the spiritual side of it, we would wrap up our busy summer season with a big blowout party every September. And because our bakery was called Harvest Moon, we used to call it the Harvest Moon Party. And we'd try and time it in September to around when the full moon of September would be. And oftentimes it would be around the equinox. So I have a lot of good memories of huge bonfires and effigy burning and some libations, some
lovely.
Nice beverages. Yeah. So, and then I've since joining the order, the one that really resonates with me is Imbolc. I'm like, I love that. That sort of feeling when you realize you're in the middle of winter and the days are getting longer. Especially where I live, it's like that's when the sun usually starts to return. November and December can be awfully gray and gloomy, but usually by February we get the colder weather, which is usually clearer. Sun is back and the days are a bit longer, and I just sort of like that anticipation of spring without it being right on the doorstep. So that's probably what I would say. Yeah.
really interesting. So Gabriella, who's always betting, and her success rate isn't great, but she got winter. Now she also said Lunasa for the ceremony, but 50%. Well done, you're upping your grades, Gabriella. It's interesting in Ireland. Imolc is spring. It marks the first of spring.
Mm-hmm. I'm aware of that going through the Guersh. I'm like, oh, we don't have any flowers out yet, but I know they're under the ground. So, yeah. under the snow. So sometimes our snowdrops will be open, but usually buried in snow. So, yeah.
Ours come up the snowdrops. That's our. They come up in sometimes. We get them in December. It depends on how. If it's been cold enough, they'll come up and they're beautiful.
Yeah. So I just wanted a quick anecdote, just talking about how the weather and maybe the climate is changing where I live. So it was, I think it was Christmas Eve last year. We had a massive snowstorm where we live. We got about a meter of snow over 4 days. By New Year's Eve, it had all melted. And I was walking down our road and there were caterpillars crawling across the road. I've never seen that, like insects flying around and caterpillars on the road. And it was basically January. And the week before, there was 3 feet of snow covering everything. It's like, that's pretty drastic change in a short period of time. Well, I like it. I like it when it's predictable winter, but when it's up and down and melting and slushy, it's kind of yucky.
Well, 2010 winter, on Christmas Eve, it was -17. Now, and there was snow for 4 weeks on the land. That never happens here. If we get snow, it hardly touches the ground. If it does, it stays a while. Like you're talking about, maybe half hour. So for 4 weeks. So on Christmas Eve, it was -17 degrees. That's centigrade, which is really cold. It's rare that these things happen. Yeah. And then on St. Stephen's Day, which is 2 days later, the 26th of December, it was 10 degrees. Wow. And a week later, I was in Tanzania and it was 27 degrees. Mm-hmm. So in the space of a week, I had gone from -17 to 27 degrees.
Right. Well, and the weather is, well, something's happening anyway. So I told you I was in the Okanagan Valley. I'm in close to a town called West Kelowna, and I think they made international news last year. They had a massive. Canada actually had one of its worst forest fire seasons on record, and there was a big fire in the West Kelowna area, and I think tens of thousands of people were evacuated, and hundreds of homes were destroyed. And so we've been going for walks and hikes in the area, and we're walking through sometimes these charred landscapes. It's really spooky. It's seeing like massive areas of forest just blackened, and
it's really hard. Yeah. That's sad.
There's a picture of these fires, and I think the picture of the West Kelowna fire made the Time magazine top 100 photos of the year. So if people want to see that, it's probably on their website or something. But yeah, very spooky. Again, the power of nature, the power of the elements. So for sure.
And to follow Trevi Johnson, Radical Joy for Hard Times, she asks us to find the beauty in that. It's not about dismissing it. Mm-hmm. It's not minimizing it, but still being able to find some beauty to give us joy in these really hard times and those difficult landscapes. Yeah. Yeah.
And realize that the fire is part of the natural cycle, and a lot of tree species actually need the fire for their cones to even open up to regenerate. So it's only when we try and impose our culture right next door to it and they conflict, that's where the problems arise. If you're building, like I'm looking around here, like some of the houses I see built like right in these forests, I'm like, oh, you're almost asking for trouble. It's like building on a floodplain or something, or it's not a question of if, it's when, right? So
it's interesting, while there's fires in other parts of the world, we've in Ireland had huge floods this winter in October, November. So lots of damage done as well. So anyway, listen, it's been such a joy talking to you, Graham. And I know from the comments from our viewers. So I just thank you. It's been really enjoyable, and
I've really enjoyed it. Yeah, it's way less stressful than I expected. I was kind of nervous going in. I thought, I hope I have enough to talk about, and have I been with OBOD long enough to to have anything worthy to say, but I hope I shared some good stories. And anyone who's listening or watching or in the Ontario or the northern states want to come visit Ravenstar, you can check us out. It'd be good to meet some OBOD members in person. I think I've only met one other OBOD member in person. So
Okay. Well, let's hope you do. And
yeah.
by the way, we're celebrating our 60th birthday this year.
Sorry?
OBOD is in
Great. Okay.
60 years of age. So
Perfect.
we're going to honor that in June.
Well, yeah, I'm really grateful to be a part of it. It's been a huge addition to my life and my journey, and I hope it brings other people as much as it's brought me so far. Can't wait to continue. And I'm going to try and make it to one of your summer or winter gatherings one year. So hopefully I'll meet you in person one day too.
That would be lovely. So listen, I'll allow you to say goodbye, good night. So you're saying good morning.
It's almost 2 in the afternoon here now. So yeah, started in the morning.
Okay, so I'll just send you back, and we'll look at the comments then. Okay.
Perfect. Thanks, Eimear.
So thank you all for coming and your comments. And I know just towards the end there were lots of comments, and I didn't get to read them because they were coming fast and furious. So it's just so lovely, and I really, really appreciate your joining in these conversations. So just to remind you that this Saturday at 7 p.m. UK time, we will be holding our winter solstice online ceremony for the order, and hopefully you can join us then. And I will be back next Thursday, and it will be the solstice for another Fireside Chat. So until then, be well, be good, and have a good evening or a good afternoon or good morning, or if you're watching a recording of this Fireside Chat. So until we meet again, slán go fóill.